We're about to get started. Here comes our next panel discussion, and once again, spearheading the panel discussion, we have with us Deepak Jacob, President Corporate Affairs, Dream Sports. So if I could please invite Deepak Jacob to please come on stage. And let me also invite our panelists. We have with us Dr. Gulshan Rai, former National Cybersecurity Coordinator, Prime Minister's Office. We have with us Dr. Shubhashis Gangopadhyay, Research Director, IDF and Dean, School of Liberal Studies, UPES. May I also please invite Vivan, Sharan, Partner, Koan Advisory. Ladies and gentlemen, we have some prolific speakers right here. Can we have a prolific round of applause as well? Let's get your applause. Let's get the energy back in the air, because that's the cue to get the panel discussion started. I'd like to quickly hand over the proceedings to Mr. Deepak Jacob. Over to you, sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great to see a full house, no pun intended. So we'll kick off the session. I just want to say a big thank you to Dr. Gulshan Rai, Professor Dr. Subhash Gangopadhyay, and Vivan for taking time out to address this convention. So I'm going to dive into it. We're trying to do something which is fairly complex and difficult, distinguishing gaming from gambling and betting. What are the public policy imperatives? What are the quantitative and qualitative methods by which we can distinguish gaming from gambling? Right now, both from a layman's perspective, from a legal perspective, or from a public policy perspective, a lot has been said about the distinguishing factors between gaming and gambling. However, they are used interchangeably. The muddying of the waters happens significantly. The jurisprudence on it is fairly clear. There is now legislation in the form of the meaty regulations. There are tax amendments which have clarified the position, but yet the muddying of the waters continues, primarily on the back of some vested interests and people with ulterior motives. Recently, the central government, as Harsh and many other speakers mentioned, recently the central government exercised its legislative power under the Constitution, under Entry 31 and various other entries in Schedule 1, amended the allocation of business rules, and brought out a regulation to regulate online gaming. In those regulations, definitions such as permitted online real money gaming, online gaming, etc. have been defined. These regulations are fairly clear that the center has exercised its power to regulate gaming. So therefore, state governments can regulate only gambling and betting. That has become adequately clear. However, who approves game formats? And how does it get approved, etc.? And what are the imperatives? I'm going to immediately take this to Dr. Gulshan Rai for my first sort of question on these public policy imperatives. Dr. Rai, a lot has been said about gaming and gambling, etc., but from an online world and from an Internet of Things world, where there are no boundaries, there are no territorial boundaries, and there's anonymity, etc. What do you see are the biggest cybersecurity or online harms that gamers face? First question, and as a follow-up, do you believe that a distinction could be made between online gaming and online gambling and betting activities?
Thank you, Deepak. First of all, I must thank you and IMAI for inviting me for this vibrant and important subject and interact with the young and very informative participants there. The online gaming, in my view, is a superset of a conventional gaming there. That's what I look at it. You play the conventional games in a more innovative way, in a rich experience through technology. And this technology is a platform which provides a software and which can be now you can have AI, artificial intelligence, and all kind of a three-dimensional systems, you can have it. In time to come, this entire platform is going to be transformed. When you get the quantum kind of a systems in picture, you can visualize the 3D pictures and plan the moves and see that in a fraction of a second. So as the technology is progressing, you are playing your conventional games in a rich manner, in an innovative manner, and a very, very interesting manner. That's a platform online gaming gives you. Like any other technology, this is also platform-based. This is what we are moving it. Emerging technologies are there. You have the inherent issues with the gaming sector there. I'm not talking gambling. Gambling and gaming is two different issue aspects there. There is a clear distinction between gaming and gambling. I mean, they are not synonymous, but one can lead to other and all kind of a thing can be done. So it has a issue of a conventional gaming sector, where the conventional games you play, where the people among the known people there in a physical environment, you can see each other, you can play each other, and all the transactions, everything is well known in front of them, a small front of people there. But in online environment, you can play, as you said, anonymity, distance, location there, you can play. I mean, among the known people, among the unknown people from any locations there, all kind of things there. So this whole kind of a technology things adds certain issues there which are not with the gaming sector there. The conventional money laundering aspects comes up here. Players from any part of location of the country or in the world can play, and they can play in any currency also. They can pay in any currency aspect there. That's the first aspect. That may lead to issues of taxation, as you said. That may lead to issue of money laundering. And these becomes much more complex than what you have the gaming when you play in a physical sector there. But added because of the technology and everything is done by the software, you can have other issues. This issue become more complex. Conventional games and these games issue become more complex, like money laundering, tracing the payment, tracing the users becomes much more complex. Added to this is the security of the platform. Means the issues can be created deliberately, and issue can be created, non-deliberately also there. Inadvertently, issue can come up. Issue can come up from the client side, player side. He can put some tool and start doing that. Whereas a platform, a owner who's a platform, you don't know who is the owner, where is he located there. He also can play that. This, because it's controlled by software, there is called a robotic software which are called bots there. They can control the games from the remote places. Anywhere, can be done. So the platform which provides the playing gaming environment there, she can also play the games there. Plus, this player also can play the games from a distance by automating things there. So it provides a rich experience, but the issue becomes much more complex. That's the online gaming aspect. That's why I call it superset. But then, there is also advantage part of it. In a gaming sector there, people can play, small people can grip through a different location with the enforcement authorities may not be knowing. It happens there in all gali mohallas and all kind of a thing. This is done there. When you play on an online platform, there will be limited online platform. You can easily track those platforms there. You can easily account those platforms there. Enforcement authorities or the administration can have a better controls on those platforms than what you play gaming in a conventional manner. So there are advantages, there are disadvantages. But then where the technology is progressing, Deepak, there, everything is converted into the platform. this gaming, I'm not saying the conventional gaming sector will go away. I'm not saying that. It will continue to there till the time. I don't see in my lifetime that will go away. But the trend of online gaming, because of rich experience, because of the immersive kind of environment, will become more and more popular, more and more interesting, and particularly younger generation coming over there. Right. So it has advantage for the government to control it better if they want to do that. If they implement proper kind of a regulation, proper system, they can control it better there. Thank you.
Saying platform security, user safety, and the traceability are issues which could be subject matter of the regulatory framework. Moving on to Vivan. Vivan, you're the closest one to Gen Z in this group of up here on the stage. So how do you see this panning out from a government's attempt to regulate the sector and also the industry's attempt to create a self-regulatory body? How do you see us addressing user safety, platform security, traceability, and all the harms that come along with online gaming?
Yeah, thanks, Deepak. I've recently taken to gaming, so I can talk about it with the degree of familiarity that you expect.
Good. Join the gang.
But look, I think the question is of regulatory architecture and what kind of aperture we need to have for different sets of harms that we're seeking to address in the digital space. And just one sort of first 40,000 feet framing that I would give to this is that there are three sets of harms, broadly put. I mean, and much of what Dr. Rai said can be subsumed within these. There's behavioral or individual level harms. There are financial harms, and there are societal level harms. Now, behavioral harms or individual level harms in gaming and gambling have been largely linked to content available on these services. Financial harms, Dr. Gulshan Rai talked about, can range from money laundering to excessive behavioral addiction that is leading to financial losses. Societal harm is not something that is within the gaming environment, something that has become prominent. Having said that, obviously with the advent of AI, disinformation, communications, messaging, terrorist recruiting via new channels, there are some dimensions of that creep in, even into a gaming space from a functional point of view. You have different functionalities in any game. But broadly put, if you look at the digital space today, the behavioral level harms that are linked to content that are not unique to gaming are largely dealt with by self-regulatory structures. So in the context of digital media, broadly put, the online curated content providers, they have a set of rules, and arguably India is actually pioneer in thinking of a three-tier structure for regulating content in this way. We've had the Advertising Standards Council for a long time. We have similar sort of self-regulation in the broadcasting world. So there's plenty of precedents as far as content is concerned, content-related harms. And again, in the gaming environment, it'll be linked to how you deal with themes like violence. And again, content is something where you want to be more careful about minors and children. You can arguably expose adults to all sorts of content as we are with all the wars around us today. I don't know what could be more gory than that. Yeah. As far as the financial, the second tier of financial harms is concerned, there I believe there is a need for thinking about co-regulatory structures going forward, where the government sits atop these tiers that we build of self-regulation, much like we see in the financial space. So for those of you who are not initiated, something akin to a SEBI-like structure, where SEBI is a full-fledged regulator. You may not need a full-fledged regulator for emerging spaces. After all,
maybe NPCI, maybe more.
Maybe NPCI or something like that. But basically what SEBI does is it looks at the exchange, it regulates exchanges, right? Financial exchanges, capital market exchanges. And these exchanges, they come up with their own bylaws. They have to meet a minimum set of corporate governance standards and fiduciary duties that are various laws, as well as SEBI's own prescriptions. Yeah. And the SEBI oversees that the exchanges are actually adhering to those. So then it becomes a question of transparency, accountability, and all of that, and we can get to those sort of ways to discover whether the actors that claim to be doing something are actually doing it. Those are questions of how you design the structure, finer questions. So I think co-regulation is an imperative here because you have a mix of a behavioral and a financial harm. And as it relates to societal harm, I think that's a question we can address in the years ahead. It will relate more to the kinds of models that are powering the technologies that are available for gamers. And if the day comes that we're using frontier models of AI to also infuse game environments with generative quote-unquote content, then it becomes a question of, is that model being licensed to that company that is providing the game in this jurisdiction in a way that there is, at some level, state oversight, so you can ensure that there won't be en masse, disinformation through those channels. So this is the way I would organize my thoughts about a regulatory framework for gaming today.
Thanks. I'm moving to Professor Gangopadhyay. The jurisprudence in India, at least the qualitative jurisprudence that the courts have developed over the last 60, 70 years, clearly distinguishes a game of skill versus a game of chance, and this therefore distinguishes gaming from actually gambling and betting. However, much debate has happened over whether or not the industry can bring in a more quantitative, objective test to make this distinction even more clearer. And in any regulatory framework that the government or the industry comes up with, there has to be a body that sort of sits at the table and approves game formats, whether it is fantasy or rummy or poker or casual games or esports, etc. There is going to be that body that needs to tell everybody what is a permitted online real money game as per the current regulations. Therefore, I just wanted to, get your insights and expertise into whether or not we can design such a game framework, a quantitative metric to measure the preponderance of skill or the preponderance of chance, etc. And what has your experience been? Have you been able to come up with any such framework?
Well, thank you, Deepak, and thank you for inviting me over here. See, the problem is that the question that I would ask myself is, can I identify a game as a game of chance or as a game of skill, right? Now, this question in and of itself is a little bit problematic, because if you had a game where the outcome was not dependent on chance, you wouldn't play that game, right? So clearly, when you're talking about a game of chance versus a game of skill, we have to reformulate the problem a little bit differently, right?
It's like the World Cup.
Yeah, like what happened in the World Cup, right? If Correct. We had known that Australia would win,
we'd all sit at home.
We would not have been watching the game. And we actually watched the game hoping, not knowing, hoping that India will win, right? So there has to be some, element of chance in any game that we play for it to be a game. So I would rather pose the problem that, can I definitely say that this is not a game of chance? In other words, we are essentially saying that we put in place a number of different criteria, and then we say that if there are n criteria that we are looking for, we can either say that if k of them are satisfied, right, then we will say that it is not a game of chance. Because all of them being satisfied could be a problem, right? And it is very easy for me to pick up something and say, this is not being satisfied, therefore it is a game of chance.
Right.
But given that every game must have chance element in it, That is not the approach I would take. Therefore, the question I would put is, can I definitely say that this is not a game of chance? Now, what we did, my two colleagues and I, we went through the data of various games that were actually played and set up different propositions to check whether we could say that this criterion was being met or not. And if you allow me, I'll just call out what we did, or which were the questions we asked, or the criteria that we checked. So the first question we asked is, will a skilled player, and you can get into various definitions of what is a skilled player, will a skilled player consistently outperform a user who makes random moves? Now, if it is a game of chance, just think about it. If it is a game of chance, right, then how do I put it? Suppose I'm tossing a coin, right? And given the number of times I toss the coin, and if the coin is completely unbiased, then I can work out the probability of when, how many heads will happen, right? And since I'm doing it randomly, I know that. Now, if the coin is biased, and I'm one of those players who knows, and we have seen lots of stories, including in Sholay, for example, both sides had the same face, right? So if I know all of that, if I'm a player with that skill, then I will definitely win at all times. And no random player can outperform me, right? So that's the first question we ask. Will a skilled player consistently outperform a user who makes random moves? Second, can a player deliberately lose a match? Because if I can deliberately lose a match, then almost by definition it is not a game of chance, right? I can control the outcome of the game. 3, do more skilled players consistently outperform less skilled players, right? So not only skill versus random, but if somebody has a higher skill compared to somebody else, then that person who has a higher skill should consistently outperform the person with lower skill. And corresponding to this, if experience leads to skill, if I have played the game for a longer period of time, then the probability or the likelihood that I'm going to win a particular draw should be higher than if I've played a lesser number of games. So experience and skill are thereby related. And finally, finally there are 2 parts to the final question. One, is the relative role of skill consistent over time? So in other words, how do I say this? Suppose you and I are playing, and we have played 10 games each, and then instead of playing your skill level, you randomly decide to play. And I will have some probability of winning. That probability should be the same as if you hadn't played randomly, right? But played the next game. So in other words, the fact that I had a certain level of skill over you should allow me to perform consistently over time, as long as that gap between you and me is maintained. And the last bit is a slightly more complicated version of this, but the idea is the same, that randomness does not give rise to skill. So you have to play deliberately to be able to generate that skill. And once you collect the data on this and use so-called random bots to play the game, you can, given that now we have computers which are very powerful and all of that, you can easily generate as many tries as you want to check these things out, right? And that is what we did, and that's what we are saying, that if any game can satisfy these 6 criteria, then regardless of whatever else it does, it should not be called a game of chance.
Thank you. I have just one follow-up question on that. The data sets used for this, will different game formats may have different data sets, but will these tests sort of be used agnostic of the data sets, or would need?
Of course, good question. This is a statistical test, right? And therefore the processes of testing these things out are the same. Right. The only complication that arises is the number of players playing the games, right? And therefore you need good computing facilities. The only other thing to worry about is, as I said, how do you define skill? Right?
Right.
And for that also, we have various criteria on how you define skill, and you can pick the one that suits the game the most.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Gulshan Rai, coming back to you. In any regulatory framework, we're going to have to incorporate these kind of quantitative tests. The problem is, you know, we always find a way of gaming the system. How does the regulator or the government or the industry, you know, put in place measures, or whose job is it to put in place those measures to prevent any gaming of such a robust system?
Thank you, Deepak. It's a very, very interesting question, and very important questions there. See, the government notified the rules in April 2023 by amending Section 79 of the Information Technology Act. Okay. Now we are end of the year there. Almost we are spent 9 months in discussing what kind of a regulation we should have it there. That's what we are discussing it, and Vivan gave the views there. I just add a minute, then I'll come back to your question there. You see, one, you said NPCI model, and he talked about it. There can be any other also, SEBI, he said SEBI also, National Stock Exchange and Bombay Stock Exchange there. SEBI role is making the entire framework there, and then the stock exchanges, basically, in fact, you see, they regulate the capital market. Correct. In a way, practical way there.
Correct, correct.
The people comes and play, people comes and do, it's their duty to enforce that. That's what the SEBI force them.
That's
so
right.
that is another kind of a model which you have actually regulator there.
That's right.
Within the framework of the SEBI, they do these things there. When coming back to a question, as I said in the beginning, the online gaming has couple of subcomponents there. One is the legal, which we call regulations there, the framework there, rules there. The second is your technology, which is done by the platform, central provider, facilitator. Then there's a client aspect there. And then what Professor Gangopadhyay said it, how to determine a skill there. You can't be a subjective. You see, if you give me, I will say this is a skill, you will say this is not a skill, or this kind of a thing goes on. So look at these subsystems or some component of the entire online gaming. We need to establish a kind of resources. We need to bring resources there to test what Professor Gangopadhyay has said. Because anyone, whether regulator or a self-regulatory body, it may be government or it may be private-led, any testing, any kind of a classification will have to be done based on empirical results. We must have those resources, we must have those infrastructure, and also the framework to regulate those infrastructure to come with a transparent empirical result.
So like a technical auditor or something.
Now, Professor said skill. He said statistical also there. So you need a random number generator. You need to test a random generator. It's not a software problem, it's a statistical problem also there. You need to bring the testing of the entire algorithm there, which you use there. You need to bring those framework for security, ensuring the security of the system there. So there will be a test labs, checking with respect to the skill games, how many steps are skill, how many steps are chances there, and then you have to bring, government will have to bring a reference point that if you have this many skill steps, it will be skill. If you have this many chance steps, this will be chance there. So majority, 51%, 90%, 80%, that all will be subjective there. But it has to bring these all framework together. One is the testing regulations, which they said it. They need to bring the testing laboratories of testing the software, testing the platform, testing the logic of the random number generation kind of a system there, and then the entire forensic aspect there. So these are more important. In my view, the government cannot regulate it because this whole industry is technologically driven, innovative sector.
But just to clarify that, Dr. Rai, these audit steps or technical standard steps that you're talking about, isn't it best done by the government, or do you think that because every time the industry does something, it will be questioned?
No. You see, ultimately, the system in our country and worldwide also the same there. Government makes a framework, they accredit those laboratories.
That's
You see?
fine.
So, but if you have set up, government can set up one lab. After all, they can't spend resources on that. They can set up one lab, which can be a reference, super setup kind of a things there. But ultimately, you have to bring up the industry. The numbers will be so high, the frequency will be so high that one lab cannot do. If you have a clear
Correct.
example in our government, there is a scientific analysis group, SAG, which tests the entire algorithm from the defense standard point of view or higher level of security point of view. It's all clocked with the
So
with the work
accredited
there.
laboratories, accredited auditors, etc.
Absolutely, because things will change so frequently there. The government has to create those resources which private sector will not create that. They have to
Understood.
lay the framework. Entire thing, so government should get busy in creating the framework, resources there, promoting those resources. Actually, it should be led by regulatory kind of body, industry-led body. Industry will lead, as I said, SEBI and the BSC and NSC there. SEBI framing the framework, the government also can play a role of SEBI, and then everything should be left to industry-led. Because innovative things are going so fast, government cannot regulate the things the way it is envisaged to do that.
Last question on center versus state. I'm going to let Vivan as well as you, Dr. Rai, because you've been with the central government for many, many years. Clearly, the central government has taken upon itself to regulate the online gaming industry. But clearly, they've also left the issue of gambling and betting to the states, because that was always there in the Constitution. You've been heading CERT for many years. You get blocking requests from states, etc. I've seen a harmonized way in which center and state can work in this area of gaming versus gambling and betting. Do you see that continuing, or do you see states trying to exercise their jurisdiction on the online internet space?
See, the entire online gaming, as I said in the opening remarks, it has two components: domain, conventional domains, plus the technology part of it. See, if you look at the Constitution of India, the entire technology implementation goes with the center there.
Correct.
That's a schedule 5, you look at it, it goes with the center there.
Yes.
Part of it. And that's why the center has regulated the technology, Information Technology Act, Digital India Act, on Privacy Act. That's what as per the Constitution they have gone through.
Correct.
But the domain can be controlled by the states there. If you look at the GST model also, the same model also,
Yes.
the entire domain of the games there, that can be controlled by that states, because then there are issue of policing there also.
Yes.
The issue of policing arises on the entire online gaming also there. That's what the state should control. But as far as the framework is concerned, because anybody can access the platform, framework from anywhere in the world, anywhere in the state, it has to be a central legislation part.
Got it. Got it. Vivan, any last comments on all the points raised by Professor Gangopadhyay and Dr. Rai?
Yeah, I think, standard setting is one major area I think that we need to focus on, and it goes beyond the skill versus chance standard. And in fact, ironically enough, there are a number of standards that have been developed by the gambling industry that show you that even for very high-risk activities, it is possible to circumscribe and sequester risk. For instance, there is the RTS 14 standard in the UK, which mandates responsible product design for, say, slot machines, and it's aimed at minimizing the likelihood that gambling software will exploit or encourage a particular problem. Similarly, you have softwares that are now standardized. There's something called Game Guard again in the UK, where you can run your game through it, and it's an online tool that addresses a game's structural risk, which includes things like the speed of play, etc., that obviously impact outcomes. So as it relates to standards, when it comes to this question of center versus state, it's pretty obvious to one and all that you can't have fragmented standards across the country. A user who is in Kerala should have the same standard of gameplay as somebody who is in Haryana.
Correct.
So that is one reason why in the digital world, the ideal is that you have a one market, you have a uniform standard, you're not fragmenting the standard. That is one of the reasons why the telegraph, telephone, etc. are part of the union list, because you need to have one standard for interoperability between things that are interconnecting with each other, and the digital world is fully interconnected.
Right.
Unless we plan to build walls like China has across each state, it's not possible to regulate digital in any different way. So standard setting is one imperative that should drive
but enforcement could be
enforcement
state-based.
could be local.
Yeah.
But even there, I think there's a nuance, even on the standard setting front, that there has to also be user agency to know what these standards are. There also state governments have to be involved. So the state government cannot, let go of the notion that it has to actually now pay back to the digital space in a sense. So far, over the last 10, 15 years, we've had almost free, unfettered growth in the digital space, and everyone's benefited. Exchequers have benefited, etc., across state and center.
Right.
People are paying GST, people are transacting, the economy is growing. And so the states also now have to create funds and repositories, not just to, of course, enhance awareness around standards. And there, one can look at sort of global examples of how even private sector standards in gaming have become household names abroad, like the PEGI and ESRB standards, because they've existed for so long, levels of literacy are higher, etc. Here, we need to bridge the digital divide, but also the literacy divide. And there, the state as a whole cannot shun that responsibility. There's also the responsibility that comes at the state level of addressing real behavioral disorders. And those disorders are on a spectrum. And it's fairly nuanced, and you need to create the ability, and it doesn't relate only to gaming, but all online formats that may get people addicted. Social media is perhaps arguably the biggest such service, which globally is seeing a lot of backlash on grounds of addiction. So now, what does the state do? Does it ban social media or say that, we'll kick the can down the road and 5 years, 10 years, we'll address the problem?
But to be fair, that's the industry's problem, right?
It's not just the
less,
industry's problem. Who will create that public health capacity, to deal with people who have to be referred to clinics? So there the states come in too. I mean, and finally, as Dr. Rai said, public order. There also it's a PPP construct that we have to explore, because like you see in the world of content, for instance, the content owners who own their copyrights are most incentivized to tell the governments that there are infringers, right? And so you can bridge that state capacity deficit that nobody in MIB or DPIT, which administers the sort of IPR regime, is sitting and looking at URLs where you're getting infringing content, whether live or otherwise.
Yeah.
Similarly, in the context of games, the industry is most naturally incentivized to think deeply about what are the games that are available that are fraudulent, offshore, illegal, illicit, etc. So why not create a working mechanism between center, state, and the private sector? And obviously, whatever this core regulatory structure is that will be set up, whether under the current Act, IT Act, or in the future, will need to also respond to this enforcement need, which is intrinsically a PPP proposition, without which I don't think in the next 5-10 years we can solve many of the issues that are coming out of the digital space. And we've arguably created a foundation to deal with these issues. We should continue to build on it rather than going back to reinvent the wheel.
Thanks, Vivan. I think we've run out of time, so I'm just going to, Professor, one last comment from you, please.
One last thing, given the discussion that is going on. I think we are making a big deal out of it. Because if you seriously think about it, the pharma companies doing clinical testing is a much more complicated issue than what we're discussing now, right? And that happens all the time. So instead of having this panic about what will go wrong, I think let's sit down and get it done. And then we can always keep learning, we can always keep changing. But we must get started on this instead of, keeping it up in the air and discussing and being paranoid about what could happen.
Completely agree. Let the data do the talking. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Really appreciate the time. Thank you.
We managed to hear it from the leaders themselves, some nuanced observations and some very, very interesting perspectives that we managed to gather from this panel discussion. Can we have a louder round of applause, ladies and gentlemen?